Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome back to the Atlas Fanfic channel. Today I'm back with What If I Was Reborn in Naruto as a Prodigy half Hyuga and Kaguya. Point 8. It's been a while since I've updated you all on the story, but I plan on being very consistent from now on. Anyways, with that being said, let the tale begin. Chapter 41. Things in the camp were tense, fights occasionally broke out, and trust was hard to come by now. Even though neither Orochimaru nor I were assassinated, the assassins still caused us problems. The fights weren't a huge deal, though they were annoying when they happened 5 times a day. I was the designated mediator as Orochimaru was too busy to do so himself. Being 11, I wasn't taken seriously and had to kick ass and take names. Though I mainly kicked ass, things usually weren't a problem after an ass kicking. Shiro, it's time to test your chakra network expansion. Orochimaru distracted me, causing the DNA I was working on to fracture and start falling apart. Surrounding a chain of DNA with chakra, removing it and then replacing it was nearly impossible. Any distractions, even a slight breeze, caused me to lose control of what I was doing. I had forgotten about that. Orochimaru and I had meant to do it a few times, but things always seemed to pop up. Sigh. I'll be with you in a moment, I just have to pack up. DNA analysis was going smoothly. I had identified most of what I needed. My lack of progress in splicing was the only thing stopping me from trying to awaken the Shikatsu Myaku. The older one, the harder it was to make complex changes to your DNA. What I wanted to do wasn't complex, nor was I planning on doing it with my DNA, but every day that I failed to produce results had me feeling the pressure. I wanted to get this done as soon as possible. It was delaying other projects that I had an interest in pursuing. What's this? Orochimaru's dissection table was covered with seals. It looked like we were going to perform a ritual sacrifice of some kind. These are used to monitor chakra. It measures and records changes in the subject's chakra. I hummed and paced around the table. It wasn't something I had seen before. I haven't seen this before. Orochimaru smiled and tilted his head back. It's my creation. Orochimaru was looking rather arrogant, but it wouldn't do me well to point that out. It is masterfully done, is what I settled for after a moment of thought. It truly was. I could see some unfamiliar symbols. They were likely created just for this seal by Orochimaru. Are those symbols your own? Orochimaru merely nodded but had a proud smile on his face. Well, let's get to it. Orochimaru probably wanted to stroke his ego some more, but I wanted to get this show on the road. Time's a wasting after all. You can indeed expand someone's chakra network. I just hummed. Sadly, you still can't escape someone's inborn genetic limit. I just hummed again. You could reach the genetic limit with training as well. Unless you were pressed for time, it seemed better to do the training yourself. How would one increase their chakra density? It was on my mind near constantly. I knew that your chakra increased in quality over time, but I had no idea what contributed to it. It's genetic. That didn't answer my question. It has a lot to do with bloodlines and genetics. People often don't have dense chakra unless they practice sage mode or they were born with it. It could be that people with Otsutsuki genes had denser chakra. Most clans that didn't directly come from the Otsutsuki were shit. Sigh. There were a couple of genes that I couldn't identify. Mom, I need some of your blood. I figured they were of Hyuga origin, but it didn't hurt to check. What do you need it for? Mom raised an eyebrow but took the vial I offered her. I'm doing science stuff. Mom hummed and sliced her finger using a chakra-coated nail. No body modifications, I hope. She squeezed her finger and a few drops of blood dropped into the vial. Nope. I touched my finger to hers and healed the wound. I took the vial and corked it soon after. Thanks, I'll be hiding in the lab for a week or 2. If you need anything, let me know. Mom nodded and sent me a sloppy wave. Will do. Oh, yeah. Send Dewey to medical whenever he trains the gates. I don't want him vulnerable. Mom shooed me with her hand. Go have fun in your lab. I chuckled and started making my exit. The mystery genes were indeed from my Hyuga half, though there were quite a few different genes. More than I had from my Kaguya bloodline in any case. The Kaguya DNA seemed rather simple compared to the Hyuga DNA. It was unusual. I sighed and rubbed my eyes. I guess simple was what I wanted. Whatever. Since I was already looking at her DNA, let's find that sensor gene. I would like it if I could sense someone coming to slit my throat. These are the genes that determine a chakra capacity. Orochimaru gestured towards two different lengths of DNA. And these are the genes for chakra density. He pointed towards two different sections of DNA again. Those are for affinities, right? Orochimaru nodded. It depends on what you get from your parents. It's more like a gene that designates hair color and less like a gene corresponding to a bloodline. So, it depends on what your parents had, I guess? What about people born with 3 affinities? The third Hokage was one such case. Mutants. I snorted. I studied people with multiple affinities extensively. It mostly comes down to mutation. They have multiple sets of genes corresponding to their affinities. Orochimaru gestured towards said genes. Most of the population will only have one set of affinity genes, while some are born with more. Orochimaru took his hand off the seal and straightened. A person's personality also seems to correspond to what element you possess, though not always. I hummed. All right, thanks. Orochimaru nodded. You're welcome. I blew a breath from my nose. One last question before I leave. Orochimaru motioned me to continue. Is there a better way to practice DNA splicing? Orochimaru didn't say anything for a moment and the lab was silent. DNA splicing will get better with practice and experience. I smiled half-heartedly. Even with my excellent chakra control, I was having problems. Will you watch how I do it and give me some tips? I've been making no progress as of late. Orochimaru grunted and sent me an annoyed look but started rooting through the cupboards looking for the required seals. I stood and started focusing on the task ahead. Orochimaru hovering over me made me feel nervous, but I did my best to put it out of my mind. The seal was 3 circles, 2 palm-sized circles with an extra small circle between them. I placed my hands on the 2 outer circles and was instantly put under a jinjutsu. I felt Orochimaru put his hands on the seal as well, and I did my best to dismiss the thought. I started channeling my chakra to the circles and sent a string of chakra from each circle into the middle circle. I located a few cells but focused on one. In particular, I located its nucleus, pushed an even smaller tendril of chakra into it. I located my desired chromosome and surrounded it in chakra and started to slowly unravel it. Over the course of 30 minutes, I unraveled the chromosome bit by bit until it was one long strand of DNA. I identified the DNA I wanted. It was just the gene for bone density. It wasn't particularly special. I located the second gene for bone density and got to work. I ejected the dominant gene and kept the recessive gene. I sent another sting of chakra to capture the free-floating DNA. I then made 2 more strings of chakra and sent them from the circles and into the middle circle, where I repeated the process. I was once again unraveling a chromosome when things started to go awry. I lost control and a slight twitch of chakra crushed the DNA I had unraveled. My frustration leaked into my chakra and destroyed the rest of my work. I sighed and removed my palms from the circles. As you can see, I can't maintain focus and hold different DNA strands with my chakra. Orochimaru stared at me for a moment. Who said you had to hold all of the DNA? I stared at him. What? Orochimaru looked at the ceiling in exasperation. Once you've extracted your desired gene, you can let it and the DNA float, or you could even unravel both of the chromosomes and then splice them. Orochimaru shook his head and started walking away. You were making things unnecessarily complicated. Fuck. After Orochimaru left, I had practiced a few more times and was successful in my endeavors. One major hurdle was overcome. Now, what do I do? I wasn't ready for any success. Sigh. Shiro, I haven't seen you in so long. I was promptly smothered with a hug and spun. I heard some glass break, signaling the loss of some of the remaining Kaguya DNA I had left. Hi, Kushina. She wasn't supposed to be on the front. And definitely not on a front where we were holding our own. What brings you here? I was released. I turned and saw Kushina rummaging through her kunai pouch looking for something. I brought gifts. Kushina shoved a book into my hands and took off. Gotta go see Sumiku. I heard her yell trail off as she gained distance. I turned my eyes to a nervous Chunin standing by the door. I couldn't stop her. I rolled my eyes. Don't worry about it. I looked at the vial that had hit the ground. It had already soaked into the dirt. I had little hope of retrieving it. I want proper flooring and no more delays on the water system. I side-eyed the Chunin while I started gathering my things. Yes, sir. I sighed through my nose. I took a moment to look at the book. Tale of a Gutsy Shinobi. Mom and Kushina had invaded my lab. Apparently, they liked the heating. Kushina could make her own heating. So, you're heading back? Mom had been here for 4 months and was growing homesick. Dewey was as well, and they were planning on making their way home as soon as they could. Yes, though I wish Shiro would come with me, he's been rather stubborn lately. It's probably puberty or something. Mom had been rather insistent that I join her. Sadly, there were things to do and people to kill. I was slowly being involved in Orochimaru's experiments and was learning lots. Taking a break would only limit my progress. Oh? Shiro too? Kakashi has been getting stinky lately. He's growing up and becoming a little man. I blinked at that. I'm not sure I wanted to hear anymore. I started making my way outside. I think it's time to escape. DNA overwrite was going fine. My main problem now was applying the seal on someone. No one would want to sit still while I applied a cursed seal on them. So, I needed to go the Orochimaru route and apply it as he did. I already had a rough idea of how to do so. I just needed a bone senbon. I could probably use some sort of fuinjutsu on the needle and use the needle to do the hard work. Then the only problem would be the activation of the seal. I could make that automatic, something that feeds on the host's chakra to fuel the transformation. Though to fuel a full body change would require a ton of chakra. I'll replace the temporary activation part of the seal with some sort of chakra drain. Sigh. Overwrite was fine as it was, but I wanted something combat applicable. I guess I'll figure it out. I should focus on editing the remaining cells first. I'm only part way through that. And even then, I'll need to run some tests. Can't go editing my DNA without testing it, now can I? This could either go horribly wrong. Or horribly right. I heard you took 6 of the captured Jonin. I turned slightly and side-eyed Orochimaru. I did indeed. Orochimaru hummed and a creepy smile covered his face. Testing DNA overwrite are we? I raised an eyebrow at him. I thought I adequately disposed of any evidence. Indeed. Orochimaru clapped his hands together. Any success? Orochimaru hissed his last word. Somewhat. I held my hand out and bones erupted from it. Oh, you've already done it to yourself? I shook my head and the bones protruding from my flesh started retreating into my body. Just my hands. Though it was successful, it changed my chakra and made it feel foreign. It felt like I had warm oil running through my body. It gave me control over my body's osteoblasts and osteoclasts and the ability to regulate my bones' calcium density. Though so far it was limited to my hands. You've done well to only change little bits of yourself at a time. the last one I taught tried to change his whole body at once and died of chakra exhaustion. I had realized that chakra cost was a problem when my last Jonin died and I only received 2 hands worth of cells. I'm starting to feel hesitant to do a full body change. The feeling of having your chakra changed is violating. Orochimaru looked gleeful. He took my hand and started performing some sort of scan on it. What you're feeling will pass. I felt his chakra slither up my arm and I gave his chakra a nudge. Remember, discomfort is temporary, power is forever, Kakik. Orochimaru laughed creepily and released my hand. Once your whole body is changed, you won't feel the same discomfort. Orochimaru started circling me and staring hard at me. I stayed still, unsure of what he was doing. When I made changes to my own body, my chakra changed color and consistency. Something similar should happen to yourself. A grin stretched across his face. Though your changes aren't as extensive as my own, the same still applies. He stopped circling me and started heading towards the exit. Remember to make changes to your DNA little by little. Don't get too excited and try to give yourself a new bloodline. Before he left, Orochimaru stopped and looked over his shoulder. I look forward to working with you, Shiro, Kakik. Orochimaru left the room with a creepy laugh. Sigh. What am I doing? I didn't know I'd get such fast results. The Shikatsu Myaku seemed to be mostly about chakra control and using chakra leaning towards yang. Something I had in spades, so I had no problems utilizing it at the moment. DNA overwrite worked out well, as did the stem cell conversion. Only 10% of the stem cells became cancerous, so little was lost. My main problem seemed to be chakra cost. With the strength of 100 seal, it wasn't much of a problem. But did I want to drain my seal in a war zone? The obvious answer was no. So, I needed some way to quickly administer the seal. Sigh. I'm glad I didn't have to cut off my hands. If things went wrong, the hands would have had to go. They might still have to go. I held my hands out in front of me and eyed them. They still looked the same. A quick flicker of chakra and I had a bone spike erupting from the back of my hand. It was a cool bloodline. I wonder if I can swim now. I've always been too heavy to swim. I'll see if I can make my bones lighter. Though should I even bother? Sigh. To swim? Or not to swim? Chapter 42. Things were going well. I had gone through 4 more Jonin and replaced my cells up to my shoulders. Next, I was going to go for a big one and supplement my subject's chakra with some of my own from the seal. I badly wanted to convert my whole body. Part of me wanted to just give it a go and use all my stored chakra. But the other, more sensible part of me advised against it. Sigh. I still had the issue of replacing any parts of my brain. There's no way that could go well. I couldn't do it myself. Clones would have to do it then. Unless I just used override on myself. It had gone well enough. There's almost no reason not to. Phew. I had applied the modified override seal onto some bone Senbon. Now I just had to stab someone, and as long as the Senbon maintained contact, I could convert their DNA into my own. Though I'd gain a handful of cells at most. Sigh. I'm starting to feel a little evil. Discomfort is temporary. Power is forever. Alright, I'm going to seal myself in the lab. Don't bother me even if we're being attacked. I decided it was go time. My immune system started fighting my modified cells, and I couldn't afford to wait any longer. Kakik. Orochimaru just laughed creepily and gave me a knowing look. I sighed and turned around. I needed to seal the fuck out of my lab. I wish I hadn't been so hesitant to do the whole thing. Stupid immune system, why are you only doing something 2 weeks after I started? I opened the door and stepped outside into the cool air. I took a deep breath and enjoyed the minor shock of cold air entering my lungs. Hopefully, this doesn't take too long. Oh! I also have to see Mom and Uwe. If I cut my arms off, would it cost less chakra to use DNA overwrite? I let the idea bounce around in my head while a clone drew the seal on the floor around me. I decided that limbs are often better when attached to the body. Sigh. I watched as the clone paced around the seal. He was checking for flaws. I gave the seal a once-over and didn't see any flaws myself. Trust but verify. Ready? I nodded at my clone. Ready. I sent a tendril of chakra to my forehead and opened the seal. My body was flooded with chakra, and I did my best to suppress my manic smile. All right, do it. I felt the clone strike the back of my neck and everything went black. I opened my eyes. I gave the room a glance looking for the clone. He was nowhere to be seen. I sent a tendril of chakra to my seal and closed it. I stood up and cracked my back. Pop asterisk. My chakra did indeed seem less noticeable now that all my DNA was changed, though there was still some wisps of my former chakra amongst my new chakra. I held my hands out in front of me and bones erupted from them, making them look like maces. I retracted the bones. A bone started protruding from my back. I reached up and grabbed it. I wrenched it out of my skin and twirled it around while admiring it. I now had my very own spine sword. I tapped the ground with it. Clack 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 asterisk. Now, what do I do with this? Surprisingly, the whole transformation didn't take more than a day. I had thought it would take longer or go catastrophically wrong. Neither happened, and I mentally thanked the Shinigami for my luck as of late, though my reserves were pretty much empty. Shiro? I turned and looked at Mom. Yes? She pointed at the sink and opened and closed her mouth a few times, seemingly trying to find the right words. Is that a spine in the sink? I nodded. Why is it in the sink? I shrugged with a slightly bemused smile. The drain was clogged. Mom nodded mutely. I decided that it was my duty to dispense some wisdom. You never know what you might need a spine for. Mom sighed and shook her head. I'm leaving next week. Alrighty. Was she bringing Kushina? Is Kushina going with you? If she took her with them, I would have my original lab back. Kushina already left. Even better. She didn't say goodbye? Mom shook her head and smiled at me. She did, but you were hiding somewhere. I nodded. Shame. I blew a breath out of my nose. Is Dewey leaving as well? Mom nodded. Are you sure you don't want to come with us? I'm sure you could use a break as well. I walked over and hugged her. Sorry, but I've got things to learn and allies to protect. Mostly things to learn. All right. Mom let out a heavy breath. I squeezed her before I disengaged from the hug. I'll see you off when you leave. Mom nodded and started to make her exit. Oh yeah, before you go. Mom turned and eyed me. I've awakened a bloodline, so don't be too surprised if you see me pull my spine out. Mom sighed. I could tell you were different. Mom shook her head and started towards the door. I guess that's all the talking we were doing about it. Alrighty. I spent the following week playing with the Shikatsu Miyaku. It was mostly making spikes and seeing if I could do some of the stuff I half remembered Kimura doing. So nothing too fancy. Shiro, go assassinate some Kumo Jonin. I raised an eyebrow and blew a sigh from my nose. I just killed some yesterday. I ambushed and killed 8 yesterday. They seem to be never-ending. I just couldn't kill enough of them. Can we make a try at their camp again? Picking them off 5 at a time is doing us no good. It was becoming annoying. Kumo was getting bolder as of late. We were constantly losing any skirmishes we got into. Konoha had many strong shinobi, but the problem was that we didn't have any of those with us. They usually belonged to the clans, and the clans were trying to send as few as possible to the front. And even then, since we were doing good we didn't get any people from the clan sent here. It was bullshit all around. Not unless you want things to escalate. Orochimaru didn't want a full-on battle, he seemed happier with the many small skirmishes we were losing. I shook my head but didn't say anything. Kumo knew where we were, it was only a matter of time before something happened. Alright, I'll go thin their numbers some. Not that I wanted to. The Kumo-nin were pretty resistant to my lightning jutsu and I was resistant to theirs. It usually made for long drawn-out taijutsu fights where I was always just barely avoiding getting swarmed. I didn't have any plans on showing off the Shikatsu Myaku. I'd like to keep it a secret for a while. Enemy attack 5 kilometers out. Sigh. I knew this would happen. I was already dressed and ready as I was just about to head out so I could jump in straight away. I activated my Byakugan and scanned the camp. Orochimaru was barking orders and doing leader stuff. Mom was standing with Dewey at the north end of the camp, and the rest of the camp was a flurry of activity. I started making my way towards Mom and Dewey. Mom was likely the one who sounded the alarm and probably the only one who could see what was up. A quick shunshin brought me right to her. So, what's happening? The words came out more casually than I had intended. We're about to be attacked by a joint Kumo and Shimo battalion. That didn't sound too bad, only 500 people. What's the bad news? This was too much of an overreaction for a battalion. Kumo and Shimo have both sent 2 of their S-rank ninjas. I knew there was more to it. I blew a breath out of my nose. How fast are they advancing? Mom shrugged. Slowly, they're trying to sneak up on us. Why would they try to sneak up on a camp that might have Byakugan or Sharingan users? Morons. Mom nodded. Who are the S-rank ninjas and what do they look like? Mom hummed for a moment before answering. Furue, he has dark spiky hair and wears round glasses. He's known for his skillful use of lightning release and is an expert tactician. Mom hummed again and scratched her nose. The second one from Kumo is C. He's tall blonde and also uses lightning release. Mom hummed a second time and squinted her eyes. The other 2 look to be Shimo's twin butchers. Both of them have bluish-white hair and are known for their kenjutsu. I joined in on the humming. The kenjutsu users weren't a problem, it was the 2 Kumo shinobi I was cautious of. Alright, I'm going to see what Orochimaru wants to do. I disappeared with a shunshin. So, what's the plan? I raised an eyebrow at Orochimaru's appearance. The sleeves of his kimono were blackened and burnt. Call for reinforcements and try to stall their advance. I blinked at him. There's only 500 of them. We outnumbered them by 4 times. Even if we didn't have a lot of quality shinobi, we could still bury them in corpses. There is likely a bigger force following behind them. The ambush battalion coming towards us is of little concern. But what comes after might be a problem. Yikes. Should you and I attack them now, when they're not expecting it? I was only worried about the Kumo-nin. The 2 kenjutsu-using brothers should be easy to kill. Especially if I use the Shikatsu Myaku. To use the Shikatsu Myaku? Or not to use the Shikatsu Myaku? That was my current dilemma. Yes, it will give these incompetents time to organize. Sigh. I swept the camp once more before deactivating my Byakugan. Alright, I'll follow you. I think I need to look at the Byakugan some more. Though Mom's 5-kilometer range was impressive, it was from the best the clan had. I know the clan head's kids had a range of 10 kilometers. Something to think about in any case. Orochimaru made his way out of the camp and I trailed after him. We went and got an update from Mom before setting out. They were approaching cautiously and taking the time to dismantle any seals or traps on their way. Orochimaru decided that we'd circle them and strike from the back, which was fine by me. I wanted to cut down the cannon fodder and limit my chances of getting swarmed before we engaged with the stronger ninja. Sigh. My seal was low on chakra, so I had to be careful. I had about a week's worth of chakra in the seal, so at least I had a fallback. I looked at Orochimaru. He looked annoyed but didn't seem nervous. He probably had faith in his ability to escape this encounter if things went sideways. Can I have the 2 Kinjutsu users? Orochimaru nodded. The other 2 are ninjutsu specialists. I'm more suited to engage with them. I wanted to activate my Byakugan but was wary of giving our position away. On second thought, can you hold the 4 of them off while I attack the weaklings they brought? Orochimaru snorted and nodded. Go ahead. Orochimaru didn't look fazed at the thought of fighting 4 S-rank ninjas. I narrowed my eyes and looked at him. I imagine his confidence wasn't misplaced. Orochimaru was one of the world's strongest ninjas. He certainly trumped his teammates. At least he would be in the future. All right. I trust in his abilities. I remember him being slippery and hard to kill. Hopefully, the same would apply here. We stayed quiet as we got closer. Orochimaru was staring at them and waiting for something. Eventually, he waved me in but stayed where he was. I sent him an annoyed look but obliged, and started creeping closer. And closer. And closer. After a while, I got close enough that I could see some movement through the trees. I eyed them for a moment. They certainly didn't blend into the frost-covered trees. I looked down at my clothes and picked at my shirt a little. My white shirt didn't blend any better than their white and gray clothes. I scratched my chin and looked around for a moment and made a last-second decision. I guess it would be good to have some practical experience with the Shikatsu Myaku. My body was already abnormally durable, but awakening the Shikatsu Myaku made it stronger. Whenever I consciously grew and moved bones, my body automatically reacted by shifting and tearing my muscle fibers, blood vessels, and flesh to allow for the bones to exit my body. My pain receptors have also changed and adapted so I don't feel anything if my bones are damaged or if my body tears itself apart. It was awesome. But my favorite part of the Shikatsu Myaku was the lack of required hand seals. I activated my Byakugan and slowed my perception. I saw a couple of heads turn as soon as my range expanded. 8 shinobi had opened their mouths and were about to shout. Sigh. My bones shifted and started to grow under my skin, forming a thin layer of armor. I started stretching, looking to see if any of the bone inhibited movement. I rolled my shoulders and twirled my wrists. Good. I wiggled my fingers and toes. Good. I bent my knees and elbows. Good. Finally, I put my arms out above my head and praised the sun. My movement wasn't impeded. We're good to go. I focused on my surrounding. An assortment of ninjas were making their way towards me. Most of them were cannon fodder. They were in Kumo's standard gray and white ninja attire. I wasn't overly worried about them. My bones were nearly impossible to damage and I had bone armor covering my body. I saw one of the ninja throw a handful at Senbon at me. I watched in amusement as they bounced off of me, most only sticking slightly in my skin before falling to the ground. Though perhaps I should protect my eyes. A smooth featureless mask covered my face. I reached up and felt the mask, feeling a little silly. I took a deep breath. I could still breathe. Good. One of the faster ninjas had arrived and struck me in the back with his lightning-coated sword. Clack asterisk. Sorry, friend. A bone spike erupted from my back and impaled the attacking ninja. What? A second spike erupted from the first and skewered his brain. I twisted a little and the spike broke at its base. Good. Though perhaps the spikes should be thinner. It would be more efficient that way. The remaining 7 were more cautious and had me surrounded. Surrender and we'll allow you to live. I focused on the one who shouted. I pointed in his direction and fired my finger bone at him. I didn't wait to see what happened and sunshine past the group and into the battalion. I looked around as everyone turned to me. I was surrounded by what felt like a sea of people. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. Sorry about this. Bones erupted from me and impaled those around me. Those not fast enough were impaled, and those fast enough were still impaled, though with a longer bone spike. I twisted and broke the bones attached to me. What is that? I pointed my fingers towards a group of people and spread them as wide as I could. 10 finger bones shot out and hit those standing in front. I shunshined into the group and bones erupted from all over me once again. I shifted and broke the protruding bones. It's a demon! I looked at the who spoke. He had been impaled but was still alive. Maybe there's a better way to do this. I aimed my palm at him and a long thin bone spear erupted out of my palm, ending the survivor's life. My clothes were tattered and I ran my free hand over my destroyed shirt, feeling slightly annoyed. I exhaled loudly and refocused on my surroundings. I twisted my wrist and broke the bone. I think this is the way to go. Someone jumped at me from behind and without turning I aimed my palm at them. He was speared through the throat. 2 more tried to attack me, and they both got bone spears to the chest and stomach. Yep, this was indeed the way to go. I saw people were congregating around me and decided it was time for a change in scenery. I shunshined into another group and speared them with bones, this time making them long and thin. I twisted and broke the bones. Suddenly I and a few survivors were bathed in fire. Whoosh asterisk. Ah! I shunshined away, focused on the one responsible. He was still exhaling a stream of fire and standing in front of a group of people who were making hand signs and preparing to launch an attack. I ran a hand through my hair while sniffing the air. It took me a second to realize that my hair was utterly fucked and I smelled like cooked meat. Fuck! What bastard! And why wasn't I paying attention? Some kunai hit me in the back and clattered to the ground. Bone spikes erupted from my body. This time I made them as long as possible and sent them as deep into the crowd as I could. I twisted and focused on my surroundings, looking for someone with stronger chakra. I shunshined next to him and bone spears exploded from me. Wah! I twisted and broke the bones. I started looking for my next target while impaling a few brave attackers with bone spikes. There you are. I shunshined next to him and bones erupted from me once again. I twisted and broke the bones. Perhaps I should change it up. Bone spikes came the easiest, but there was little I could do other than stab and impale people with them. Perhaps it's time for a sword. A bone protruded from my back and I reached up and grasped it. I focused on making it as dense and sharp as I could. Finally, I ripped it from my back. I watched a few ninjas halt their advance at my display. I waved it at them teasingly. Never seen someone pull their spine out before? I saw one nod mutely and I snorted. Boom asterisk. I focused on the area where the explosion occurred and saw Orochimaru being chased by 3 ninjas with large reserves. I saw a few other people turn and look as well. Sigh. I shunshined towards Orochimaru's slowest pursuer and impaled with my spine sword. One of the others turned and took a swipe at me with a sword while the other continued his pursuit of Orochimaru. I shunshined behind him and tried to impale him. He blocked me, jumped away, stuck his sword in the earth, and started making hand seals. I saw his hands light up with what I'd call an aggressive amount of chakra and he jumped towards me. Take this monster. I decided that I wanted none of that and shunshined into the surrounding ninja, ready to start my killing spree again. I slowly made my way into Shiro's lair. When I was passing by I noticed his chakra had felt a little different, so I came to check on him. I paused my stride and stared at the sink for a moment, unsure if my eyes were deceiving me. Shiro? He gently set his brush down and looked at me with a raised eyebrow. Yes? I pointed at the sink but couldn't find the words. There was a spine with a handle on it sticking out of the sink drain. Is that a spine in the sink? Shiro shrugged and nodded. Why is it in the sink? Shiro shrugged with a slightly bemused smile. The drain was clogged. I nodded but wasn't sure what to do. Parenting books never prepared me for finding spines in places they shouldn't be found. You never know what you might need a spine for. I sighed. I wasn't sure how to deal with this. How does one tell their son not to leave spines in the sink? I'm leaving next week. Shiro looked slightly saddened. Alrighty. Shiro shifted around and kicked his feet for a moment before he spoke. Is Kushina going with you? I raised an eyebrow at him. Was he eager to see her? Kushina already left. He was going through puberty. Perhaps Shiro has a little crush. She didn't say goodbye? I shook my head with a slight smile. She did, but you were hiding somewhere. Shiro nodded, looking rather unbothered. Shame. Perhaps Shiro didn't have a crush. Is Due leaving as well? I nodded absently while I thought about Shiro's possible lack of interest in the opposite gender. The only person he has ever shown interest in was that weird child named Guy. I stared at Shiro for a moment. I hope that's not the case. I want some grandchildren. Perhaps this is how my parents and grandparents felt. I bit my cheek and put it out of my mind. It's best not to dwell on the past after all. Are you sure you don't want to come with us? I'm sure you could use a break as well. Shiro made his way over to me and wrapped me in a warm embrace. Sorry, but I've got things to learn and allies to protect. Shiro's words couldn't have made me prouder. Though I didn't want him out here any longer. I couldn't be proud of him if he was dead. Shiro, perhaps sensing my unease, gave me a reassuring squeeze before backing away. All right. I let out a heavy breath as I spoke, feeling slightly emotional. I didn't want to leave him here, but as it was, this might be the best place for him. After all, the only way for a ninja to become great is to bathe in the blood of hundreds of enemies. Madness, blood, and relentless training make a great ninja. Shiro been relentlessly training his whole life and was plenty mad. Now all he needed was to forge himself in the blood of his enemies. I'll see you off when you leave. Shiro spoke, breaking me from my thoughts. I nodded and started to make my exit. Oh yeah, before you go. Shiro's voice was sheepish. I turned and eyed him, wondering what he had gotten up to this time. I've awakened a bloodline, so don't be too surprised if you see me pull my spine out. So that's where the spine came from. I sighed. Of course, Shiro awakened some sort of bloodline. Though hopefully, that involved as little experimentation as possible. I could tell you were different. I shook my head and started towards the door. This was too much for one day. I sighed and stared at my clothes. They were plain and lacked clan markings. It made it easier for you to blend in with Konoha's clanless ninja and made it less likely for you to be targeted for your bloodline while roaming on missions. It was something that I had started doing after seeing Shiro use it to great effect. Wearing my headband over my forehead and not my neck was another Shiro-inspired change to my wardrobe. Enemies aren't as interested in capturing a Hyuga when their forehead was covered. I sighed and sat on the edge of my cot. I leaned on my hand and drifted into idle thought. Shiro was experimenting with bloodlines. It was something that would set him against the clans in Konoha. Bloodline theft was a very serious concern for the clans, and if they thought there was even the slightest chance of Shiro attempting anything, I stopped myself from following that train of thought. Worrying about it wouldn't do me much good. I held my hands in front of me and stared at my palms blankly. There was always something to worry about. As soon as I wasn't watching him, Shiro was invading villages and gaining bloodlines. I wasn't sure how to feel about either of those. How does one tell their son to stop invading villages? And how does one tell their son to keep their bloodline theft to a minimum? And even if I knew how, was it the right thing to do? I wanted Shiro to grow and become more powerful. Invading villages and acquiring bloodlines covered both. So how could I tell him to stop? I ran my thumbnail along the line on my palm. I wish Shiro had less dangerous ways to become strong. But perhaps Shiro was taking the best possible path. I rubbed my face with both of my hands. I didn't know. Enemy attack 5 kilometers out. I kept my focus on the advancing ninja. Most of them had at least Jonin-level reserves, which didn't bode well for us. Shiro appeared behind me and spoke before I had time to mentally register his arrival. "So, what's happening?" Shiro spoke casually, like a potential battle wasn't a big deal. Though perhaps to him it wasn't a concern. "We're about to be attacked by a joint Kumo and Shimo battalion." I eyed the 4 with the largest chakra signatures. They were likely S-rank ninja. What's the bad news? Shiro, that was the bad news. Kumo and Shimo have both sent 2 of their S-rank ninjas. Shiro sighed through his nose. How fast are they advancing? I shrugged. They arrived fast, but were now taking their time approaching us. Slowly, they're trying to sneak up on us. I wondered what idiot made them slow down. If they had blitzed us, they could have done major damage before we were able to properly respond. Morons. I nodded. Who are the S-rank ninjas and what do they look like? I hummed and sent some chakra into my Byakugan. I changed the chakra flow and skin and bone became visible. I changed it again and I could now make out what they looked like. Furue, he has dark spiky hair and wears round glasses. He's known for his skillful use of lightning release and is an expert tactician. I hummed and scratched my nose trying to remember the blonde one. After a moment I remembered hearing about him from a briefing that Orochimaru had given about Kumogakure's current military might. The second one from Kumo is C. He's tall, blonde, and also uses lightning release. I hummed again. I almost instantly recognized the second 2. The other 2 look to be Shimo's twin butchers. Both of them have bluish-white hair and are known for their kinjutsu. Shiro hummed with a slight smile on his face. Alright, I'm going to see what Orochimaru wants to do. His smile slowly grew. And with a slightly manic expression, he disappeared and reappeared beside Orochimaru. I watched them talk for a moment before focusing back onto the army. I stopped altering the chakra in my eyes and went back to the Byakugan's normal vision. The ninja were still slowly creeping towards us at a snail's pace. It was lucky that whoever was leading them was an idiot. Shiro and Orochimaru made their way out of the camp after a quick update on the enemy's position from me. I watched with bated breath as Shiro and his senseis slowly made their way to the back of the attacking ninja's formation. When they got close, Shiro split off from Orochimaru and my brow wrinkled. I hope Shiro didn't plan on engaging the ninja by himself. I focused on Shiro, giving him my full attention. He activated his Byakugan and his chakra rapidly formed thin plates under his skin. I blinked slightly. The plates were obstructing my vision and I couldn't make out his chakra system anymore. Even his skull was filled with chakra, preventing me from seeing any of his tenketsu. I saw a group of ninjas start towards Shiro. Shiro seemed to have noticed this as well, judging by the tilt of his head in their direction. Sadly, he ignored any potential danger and started stretching in the middle of the battlefield. My stomach lurched and I felt like I was going to throw up. "Shiro, what the fuck are you doing?" My words came out in an untended whisper. Shiro ended his stretch with a pose. He was standing straight up and his arms were uplifted. Finally, after a long torturous moment, Shiro stopped posing and focused on his surroundings. I watched an approaching ninja throw something at Shiro, who stood there and didn't move. Any relief from Shiro's regained focus vanished and I was again left with a knot in my stomach. Whatever was thrown seemingly did not affect, as Shiro just stood there. Chakra covered his face and Shiro rubbed it while a ninja attacked him from the back with a lightning chakra-coated sword. My heart nearly stopped when Shiro didn't move. The sword hit him and a cry almost burst from my lips. Until I saw a giant spike of chakra burst from Shiro and pierce the ninja. I noticed that the sword was stopped by the plate of chakra and took a much-needed deep breath. Was this Shiro's new bloodline? A second spike came from the first and burst out of the ninja's head. Shiro shook his body and most of the chakra in the spike traveled back into his body. I was focusing heavily on Shiro. What was his bloodline? He said something about pulling his spine out. Shiro pointed at one of the ninjas up in a tree and he fell from the branch dead. Shiro in the meantime had left my area of focus and shunshined into what could have possibly been the worst place to be in. He was surrounded. Little by little people started to turn their heads towards him. Shiro seemed unaffected. He remained still. I saw him bob his head and his body was covered by glowing blobs of chakra. Spikes burst from those chakra gobs and impaled the people surrounding Shiro. Shiro twisted and broke the spikes coming from him, this time leaving loads of chakra behind. Shiro held his hands out towards the crowd and a few fell. Shiro rolled his shoulders and shunshined into the crowd where more bones exploded from him faster than I could register. Shiro twisted and broke the spikes at their base. He aimed his palm towards a fallen enemy and he was speared with a finger-thick spike. I licked my dry lips. Someone jumped at Shiro from behind. Without turning, Shiro aimed his palm over his shoulder and killed the jumping enemy. Shiro seemed to have everything under control. Two more sped towards Shiro and they both got speared. Shiro disappeared and appeared in another crowd of enemy ninja. Spikes burst from him again, though this time there were more of them and they were thinner. Shiro twisted and the spikes detached. Shiro was suddenly bathed in fire, surprising both me and him. Just as I started getting worried, I realized that Shiro was already impaling another bunch of ninja a ways away. I took a deep breath and stopped focusing on Shiro. I didn't need to watch him and work myself into a panic. He unscathed after being bathed in fire and taking a chakra-coated sword to the back. Watching him was pointless. Having a near heart attack every couple of seconds isn't going to help matters any. I made my vision telescopic and almost immediately saw an approaching wave of ninja. That was an uncomfortable amount of ninja. I put a hand on my chest. Looking at the wave of ninjas was giving me chest pains. I took a deep breath and steeled myself. I have to let the battalion commanders know. I couldn't let Shiro get swarmed. I took a second deep breath and set off. I had a bit of running to do. Chapter 43. I shunshined behind the sword-wielding Shimonin and tried to impale him with a bone spike. He dodged and hit me in the mask with his sword, but did little damage. Bone spikes erupted from me, but the sword-wielder coated himself in lightning and sped off, throwing a Kimonin at me, who got impaled instead. I blew an angry breath from my nose. Why wasn't he using some weird frost-centric jutsu? I shunshined after him. Bone spikes erupted from my palms, but impaled another Kimonin instead of my target. Whatever. Orochimaru had finished with the other guy and was now bathing some ninja in a sea of flame. I, however, couldn't seem to kill this one. And I was running a little low on chakra. I shunshined to Orochimaru and shot my finger bones into the surrounding crowd. Why are we the only ones here? It was as Orochimaru predicted. After we had decimated a good part of their force, about 500 more came from behind and made our lives difficult. And I wasn't seeing any Konoha shinobi around us. They're probably having their own battle a distance awa. Orochimaru was interrupted by a streak of lightning that shot towards us. He made a single hand sign and waved his hands, blocking the lightning with a wall of wind. I pointed my fingers at our attacker and fired them. I don't think I can do this for much longer. I still have my seal, but I hoped I wouldn't have to tap into it. I'm tired of this as well. He finished his sentence, slapped an explosive tag onto someone's forehead, and kicked them into the crowd. Boom asterisk. I think it's time to retreat. I'm going to take one more shot at Shimo's remaining S rank. Orochimaru shook his head and smiled at me. He started going through some hand seals. Formation of 10,000 snakes. I watched in disgust as hundreds of snakes came from Orochimaru's mouth. I absently-mindedly impaled an attacker while I watched a tidal wave of snakes pass through the battlefield. I watched a blade appear from within the snake's mouth and impale a screaming man. People were running and trampling their slower comrades while trying to escape. I stood quietly trying to understand what I was seeing. After a while, Orochimaru stopped vomiting snakes and stood up. It seems I took care of the Shimonin for you. I blinked. Probably? I just watched hundreds of people get buried in snakes. Fuck. I still don't have any army-destroying attacks. Clean up any stragglers and meet me at the camp. Orochimaru ran off in a light jog, only pausing for a moment to launch a wind blade at a still-living opponent. Sigh. I stayed where I was but pointed at a survivor and launched my finger bone at him. Gah! Kumo and Shimo cut their losses and retreated, so I was left to wonder and think. I walked through camp absently looking at the wounded. My main problem with the Shikatsu Myaku was my lack of range. I couldn't control my chakra when it got past 6 or so feet around my body. If I could have created a forest of bone blades like Kimimaro did, the battle could have ended much sooner. Or at least I could have done more damage. I could increase my range with training, but it was slow going. Anyone have any soldier pills? Someone dropped 2 into my hand. Thank you, miss. I popped one in my mouth and put the other in my pouch. Alrighty. I looked at the line of people waiting to get into the medical tent. You, and you, come here. I pointed out some of the most injured. Come here, I'll heal you. It didn't hurt to build some goodwill with the soldiers. How are things on your end? Mom didn't look like she had even fought, so I wasn't overly worried about her. But it never hurt to ask. I stayed out of it and directed the squads. I hummed and pulled a Senbon out of my poor patient's side. I ignored his gasp of pain and looked at Mom. And Dewey? Mom smiled. Last I saw, Dewey kicked someone's head clean off. I activated my Byakugan and browsed the medical tents for a moment. He's flirting with one of the Menin, so I'm sure he's fine. As I said that, I saw Dewey leap from his bed and start doing push-ups. Alrighty. I deactivated my Byakugan. How are you feeling, Shiro? I hummed for a moment and started looking for my next patient. Weird, was what I eventually settled for. I spied a nervous but unharmed woman and stared at her for a moment. The more I kill, the less valuable life seems to me. Mom hummed and stared at me but didn't speak. I waved the woman over when we made eye contact. Hello, miss, what's the problem? She looked fine but slightly pale. I've been feeling sick. I wanted to see if I was poisoned. I hummed, took her hand, and after a moment I knew her problem. You're not poisoned, but you are pregnant. I looked at Mom and pointed at the now speechless woman. Mom nodded and took the woman by the hand, leading her away. Next. I pointed at someone missing an arm. You have that arm? I can reattach it if you have it. He shook his head. Sigh. Get some friends and look for it. If you find it in time, I can reattach it. I shooed him off, looked around for someone else. You, come here. I pointed at someone who was holding his intestines in both of his hands. Are you sure you won't come with us? I eyed my mom as she pouted. Yes, I'm sure, and don't pout at me. As much as I wanted to get to Konoha and take some DNA from every Hyuga I could, I was better off staying where I was and learning under Orochimaru. Here, give these to who they're addressed to. I handed her a stack of envelopes. And buy a house or an apartment complex. I don't want to have to do any missions ever again. I had been done with missions for a long time. I had no interest anymore. Alright, write to me, and don't let them send you to grass. I gave Mom a hug and Dewey a youthful thumbs up. Alright, get out of here before someone needs something. Mom and Dewey nodded. I sent a final wave and turned, not bothering to see them join the other ninja heading home. So, what's the plan for today? Orochimaru was having a blast. A good amount of people surrendered, so he had a lot of test subjects. I'm going to continue my experiments. You are free to do as you wish. I rolled my eyes. He was politely asking me to scram. Alright, see you later, sensei. I started making my way out of Orochimaru's lab. Shimo only had one more S-rank ninja, so they were unlikely to participate in the war any further. Kumo, on the other hand, had a surplus of S-rank ninja. I was wary of engaging with them. They had the current Raikage, whatever Jinchuriki they had, and the future fourth Raikage, all of whom I was extremely wary of engaging with. With their crappy S-ranks dead, they would likely send one of the dangerous ones. Though hopefully they stayed where they were and kept Kiri busy. Looking at my DNA provided no clues about my limited control at a distance. Or at least I couldn't see anything obvious. There was probably something amongst my Hyuga DNA. But I had no idea what most of it did, and it wouldn't be easy to find out what they did or could do. It was foreign, but that was about as much as I could discover. It's going to take a while to discover what it is without invasive gene manipulation. I don't think I could get away with doing that. Sigh. I looked at my burnt hair in the mirror and pondered the future. I was finally somewhat strong. Now I needed to decide what to do. Zetsu and the Akatsuki were going to be my main concern in a few years. Most of the old ninja like the third Raikage will die, with Inoki and the third Hokage being the exceptions. I got the Shikatsu Myaku, so the Tenseigan was next on the list. Although I still had no clue how I would get it. Going to the moon seemed like my best bet, but there were other avenues to explore. After the war, things would be slow until the Ninetales attack. I'll use that time to shore up my Fuinjutsu and see if I can get into space-time seals. If I could get my hands on the Hiraishin, even better. I wouldn't be able to travel to the moon right away, but I would have somewhere to start. Maybe if I was lucky, I could find what those moon Otsutsuki used to travel to the elemental nations. That guy must have had a way there and back. How else would he have acquired the Byakugan? I had regrown my hair and felt like a new man. Well, boy. I decided that it was time I go do something I had wanted to do for a while. Sensei, would the Hokage be mad if we took over Shimandakure? I watched Orochimaru ponder on the idea for a moment. Probably. Orochimaru returned to writing some sort of seal on someone. Why? We have the manpower to occupy Shimo, we just need to bring our stuff in and get set up. I only really wanted to look around the place. Their version of the Kage Tower didn't have any scrolls, so I wanted to have a look around the village and find their loot. The Hokage wants us to continue as we were and occupy our small corner of frost. I hummed and admired Orochimaru's seal work. He seemed to be making some sort of cursed seal prototype. Exciting and worrying. Can I go pillage them then? Orochimaru nodded distractedly. Don't get caught, and if you do get caught, find a way to shift the blame onto someone else. I nodded and gave him a sloppy salute. Will do. I'll make sure either Iwa or Kiri get the blame. Orochimaru shook his head and shooed me with his hand. I spun on my heel and started towards the exit. I've got a village to loot. A couple of shunshin later and I was standing within viewing distance of the wall. I activated my Byakugan and took my time scanning the village with my telescopic sight. I wasn't seeing much. They had some sort of underground system of bases connected by tunnels, but other than that there was nothing of interest. I watched the chakra of those in the tunnels for a moment before getting bored. The tunnels seemed to be where most of the shinobi lived or operated in. I created some bone claws on my fingertips and concealed my chakra. I'm going to climb that wall and find some loot. After stealing some clothes, I was bundled up and enjoying a nice walk with a smile on my face. Shimo was a nice place. On the surface, it seemed to be mostly civilian with only the occasional ninja bounding from rooftop to rooftop. If I hadn't seen the underground complex, I probably wouldn't have suspected they would have such a thing. I wandered Shimo's market and eyed their wares. There was a distinct lack of vegetables and what seemed to be a surplus of meat. I browsed a while longer before setting off in search of their bank. There was a surprising lack of fuinjutsu in the bank, or as it was named, the Shimagakure Bank. There was some sort of sensors and what seemed to be pressure sensors under the floor panels. Some Chunin-level guards rotated every couple of hours. All in all, their defenses were shit. The Chunin guards were likely sensors, so I'd have to take them out before they sounded or triggered any alarms. Would they have seals tied to their vitals? That's what I would do. But I guess it's unlikely they would do the same. They didn't even have any chakra-sensing seals. I deactivated my Byakugan, blew a breath out of my mouth, and watched the fog my breath created fade and disappear. The lack of seals oddly made me feel less safe. If there were stronger defenses, I would probably feel better about robbing the bank. Sigh. I'll look around a little longer. Maybe I can find where they keep their forbidden techniques. I stood staring at what I dubbed as the underground library. It had a lot of traffic around it, people were coming and going, and there were even some residences built around it. There was some seal work on the walls as well, though it only seemed to be for reinforcing the tunnel. There was also a well-stocked armory, though it was heavily guarded. I decided that it was too much work to get in there. I turned and started back towards the bank. There would be a shift change in a few hours. That's when I'll strike. 5 minutes after the shift change, I struck. I killed the 2 guards and went on my merry way. The sensors were annoying, but they seemed to have no backup. I cut the wires and the sensors were dealt with. The pressure sensors weren't much trouble either. They activated an alarm at the guard station so they could be ignored. My real problem was the vault. I stood looking at the vault door. There was a combination lock and 2 keyholes. I eyed the keyholes. I walked over and stuck my finger into the opening. Bone started to fill the keyhole. Eventually, I turned my wrist and heard a satisfying click. I repeated the process with the second keyhole and smiled when I heard a second click. Now I stood staring at the combination lock. I placed my hand on the lock and started pumping chakra into the mechanism. I placed my hand on the dial and started turning it at random. There were 4 wheels like pieces of metal inside the lock. Each wheel had to align so a piece of metal at the top could fall in and allow a handle on the vault to turn unobstructed. I hummed, gave up on the dial, and started turning the wheels with my chakra. Eventually, the wheels were in the correct position and the piece of metal fell into a slot and no longer obstructed the handle. Finally, I grasped the handle and gave it a turn. I heard something shift and tugged at the vault door. The door cracked open. I smiled and pulled the door open the rest of the way. I walked into the vault room and looked around. There was a shelf with surprisingly little cash, and a few bars of gold and silver. I blinked at the cash and sighed. There was around 2 million ryo, which sounded like a lot but was only enough to buy a nice house. Every 100 ryo was about what $1 was in my last world. I sighed again and started sealing the spoils away in some scrolls I prepared. Clearly, Shimo kept most of their funds elsewhere. I looked at the wall of lockboxes. I wasn't too interested in them, but for the sake of completion, I decided I should clear them out. I walked over and stuck a finger into one of the keyholes and made a bone key. I turned the key, pulled the door open, and the lockbox out. I opened the box and admired the jewelry and bills in the box. I closed the box. I think I'll just seal the boxes up. I won't have time to empty every one of them. I blew a breath from my nose and cracked my knuckles. I got most of the lockboxes. There was a row at the top that I had given up on because I was too short to reach it. I decided to forego them and just loot the easy-to-reach ones. I gave the lockboxes one last look before I started plastering explosive notes all around the vault. I eyed the pile of bone keys on the floor and sealed them up as well. I didn't need to leave any evidence. I left the vault and started placing as many explosive notes as I could around the building. I decided that this would cover up my chakra signature, or at least delay someone trying to find my chakra signature left from my chakra usage in the bank. I gave the interior of the bank one last look before I made my way towards the back door which I entered from. I was crouched on top of Shimo's walls and eyeing the village. It's too bad Orochimaru wasn't interested in occupying the place. Shirogakure had a nice ring to it. I made a hand seal and an explosion lit up the night. I admired it for a moment before turning around and jumping down. Chapter 44. Alright, here's your share, I said as I placed a scroll on Orochimaru's table. Orochimaru side-eyed me. How generous. I rolled my eyes at him. I gave you exactly half. Which was true, if one didn't count the lockboxes. Orochimaru nodded but didn't move to check his share of the loot. Will you get me some more test subjects before you go? I nodded. Sure thing, I'll be back in a moment. The Shikatsumiyaku was pretty easy to use, as long as I was only making spikes. Making anything complicated required more concentration and chakra control. Neither were a problem, it was a minor inconvenience at best. My new problem was my lack of weapon skills. So, the plan was to have my clones work under Orochimaru while I spent time figuring out my new limits. I already had a few ideas and was eager to test them. I'll find an instructor soon as well. Perhaps when I return to Konoha. I was surrounded by a suit of bone and doing some stretches. Although the bone armor protected me pretty well, it was unwieldy and slow to form. It slowed me a great deal and limited my flexibility. But I guess it was ideal if I wanted to tank an attack. I put my hands in front of me and formed bone lattice. I'm not sure what good the lattice would do, it was just a test of control. The armor and lattice retreated into my body, and I was again feeling annoyed at my ruined clothes. Although the bone armor was neat, it would probably never see use. The armor under my skin served its intended purpose. I often wouldn't need more protection than that. I needed a name for it though. Bone armor was already taken. Dermal armor? I guess. I shrugged. I guess it didn't matter too much. I'll only need cool names if I'm shouting my attacks at people. I sighed and held both of my hands in front of me. 3 claws grew from my knuckles and brought a smile to my face. I was finally able to disembowel my opponents with Wolverine claws. I had a goofy smile on my face. Wolverine claws became a reality. My smile faded and I was left feeling slightly empty. I ignored the feeling and coated the claws on my right hand in electricity. I watched the blue electricity spark and jump from blade to blade. I tried to make the lightning chakra vibrate as much as I could before slashing the claws on my left. The lightning claws bit into the other claws but stopped partway through. Almost useless. But at least I figured out the cutting part of lightning release. Thank you, Kumonin. I smiled mirthfully and retracted the claws. So far it seemed that I only had control of the bone shape before it came out of my body, and I had slight control when it came out of another bone. It wasn't too big of a deal. Perhaps I just needed to let the bone branch out like the branches of a tree did. How did Kimimaro make that forest of bone blades? Could he make bones outside his body and without other bone as a base? I dismissed the thought, it was something for later. I didn't have the range for it anyway. Bone Senbon started to appear from every inch of my skin. I cracked a smile. I probably looked like a porcupine. I launched the Senbon. I looked around the room admiring the Senbon-coated wall. I made a finger gun and launched a Senbon from my fingertip. Alrighty. I held my palm out and started launching multiple Senbon like a machine gun. I pursed my lips. And I was worried about lacking ranged attacks. Though should I use actual bullet-shaped bones? I probably shouldn't give the ninja any ideas. I held my palm out again and a long thin blade erupted from my skin. Palm blade, I guess. I retracted the blade before making one erupt from my wrist. There we go. Wrist blades. I retracted the blade and sat down with crossed legs. The Shikatsumiyaku provided one with extreme versatility. It was extremely overpowered. As cheesy as it sounded, the only limit was your imagination. That and the fact that you couldn't do complicated bone manipulation outside your body. I smirked slightly at the thought. The Shikatsumiyaku was versatile. I almost didn't need any weapon skills, though I should still pursue them a bit. Learning things was never bad after all. Biological absorption was done. There was still some cancer, but that could always be dealt with later. The technique could be further refined in time. I was now somewhat unkillable and strong. It left me feeling empty and bored. I had gotten the Shikatsumiyaku way ahead of when I had planned on acquiring it. I was bored but lacked the motivation to do anything. So, I was spending the day laying on my cot and making different bones appear from my palms. I had made my skeleton become my armor. I was literally covered by my skeleton. I got out of my bed and made my way over to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror dully. This was creepy as shit. What were those things called? Hollows. I looked like a hollow. I just needed a hole in my chest and the look would be complete. Sigh. I started retracting the bones and watched in the mirror as my creepy skull-wearing face was replaced with my more normal face. Now I knew how to strike fear in my enemies. I succeeded. I've awakened the Shikatsumiyaku in myself and have a working form of immortality. But I've never felt emptier. We're attacking Kumo's camp tomorrow. I raised an eyebrow. What happened to occupying our little corner of frost? I looked down at my half-finished seal. I could already tell it was garbage. It was a mess of French and English with the standard Uzumaki swirl in the middle so it can draw nature chakra in and power itself. The Hokage wants us to keep Kumo occupied so the Umbu can run missions in the area. I hummed and eyed the seal. Perhaps devour was too aggressive. But that's what I wanted the seal to do. Sounds vague. I wanted a way to instantly absorb and overwrite some cells. The overwrite part was done as long as it just stem cells. What I needed now was a way to change cells into stem cells via Fuinjutsu. The idea was that I'd have a way to instantly renew myself should my body ever become too damaged. The strength of 100 seal was for when I ran out of chakra, and this seal would be for when my body was too damaged to heal. A backup for the backup, if you will. I looked at Orochimaru and saw he was studying my seal. He wasn't saying anything, so I remained silent as well. I'll see you tomorrow at dawn. Orochimaru turned and started leaving. I blinked. It was surprising he wasn't asking about the seal. I turned my eyes back to the seal. It was unbalanced and inefficient, but I was lost on how to improve it. I sighed. I'll come back to it later, as it was now things were fine. I was watching over the preparations while Orochimaru assigned the platoon leaders their missions. Orochimaru opted to attack midday. I believe the goal was to surprise them and destroy their camp before beating a hasty retreat before we engaged in a long drawn-out battle. I liked the plan. It had only been a month since the attempted surprise attack and I hadn't had time to store a lot of chakra in my seal. So, a short battle was ideal for me. I hummed. A short battle would also let me test out some moves. Long time no see. I stared blankly at Minato. Yes, long time no see. I turned and stared out at the camp. Coming to assist in the attack? Last I heard Minato was in grass messing up some IWA Nin. Minato crossed his arms and nodded. Bring your students with you? Minato shook his head. They're too green to bring to the front. I shook my head at that. We were 10 months into the war. There was no way that they weren't battle ready. Shame, I wanted to meet them. Minato sent me a warm smile. I'll bring them around. I'll be here for a while. Fuck. Good, I can't wait to see how much Kakashi has improved. Minato winked at me. Not as much as you have, Shiro. I smiled like I was embarrassed. Hopefully I can keep it up. I fear my growth won't always be as fast as it is now. Minato laughed and nodded. Hopefully. I took a deep breath. This was annoying. Orochimaru, Minato, and I were leading the advance. Now and then I'd look back and wonder how 2,000 ninja could jump around and be as silent as they were. It was off-putting. We're approaching their camp. We eliminated their best sensors, so you should remain undetected should you use your Byakugan. I took the hint and activated my Byakugan, expanding my range to its maximum. I didn't see anything, so I made my sight telescopic. The camp was in range, but a problem was immediately apparent. They have someone with way above Kaguya level chakra reserves. I was instantly feeling less enthusiastic about the whole thing. Orochimaru frowned but didn't slow his advance. Minato just nodded and continued forward. I let my vision return to normal. Well, I say you take him. I looked at Orochimaru and stuck my tongue out. It was your idea, after all. Orochimaru didn't look amused but nodded and stayed silent. I figured he would be fine, he was slippery. I chuckled and started forming my dermal armor. There was another one there, though they had less chakra, they were still above Kaguya level as well. I formed a featureless mask over my face as my eyes were my main weakness now. I'll cause as much destruction as I can, while you and Minato distract the two stronger ones. I blinked under my mask. A chakra-coated blur shot towards us. Never mind, they're coming to us. I slowed my pace and let Orochimaru and Minato pull ahead. I'll take a different route. I gave them a wave and shunshined as fast as I could to the right. I think I'll avoid that shit show. I successfully avoided the future fourth Raikage and his pet Jinchuriki. I was now overlooking the camp and wondering if I should have taken some soldiers with me. The camp seemed to be preparing for a fight. Perhaps it was my chakra usage that alerted them. I was almost 3 kilometers from them though. I sighed and slowed my perception. I took one last look and made a rough plan before I shunshined into the camp. I arrived in the densest group of people and sent bone spears as deep into the crowd as I could. I ignored the sounds of screams and shunshined into the next densest group. This time I launched Bone Senbon from my body, though it seemed to not be as effective as I would have liked. Most of those that I hit were still alive and would live to fight another day. It was something to rectify. I aimed my palm at a ninja who tried to attack me from behind and speared him through the throat. I moved my palm slightly and shot the bone spear through the throat of the one I killed and into the crowd that now surrounded me. I stood for a moment and idly watched the surrounding Kumonin. I wonder if I should stop shooting projectiles. What's stopping someone from picking them up and using them? They are chakra conductive as well. I pointed my index finger at a brave ninja who had stepped forward and pierced his eye with a bone senbon. I sighed and cracked my knuckle. Nobody wanted to attack, they seemed content to group up and watch me. I'll fix that. Claws burst from my knuckles and I coated them in electricity. Sorry, and ADD ants. That sounded less cool when my voice cracked. No matter, my voice was muffled by the mask anyways. I slowed my perception further and shunshined into the group. I ran my chakra-coated claws through the stomach of a fleeing ninja. I had done this so many times that it was blurring together. I took a deep breath, deactivated my Byakugan, and returned my perception to normal. The mask on my face receded, the smell of blood hit me and I stood staring at the mess I had made. All that was left around me were bodies, any surviving ninja had fled. There were pools of blood in areas where the ground dipped. Using my claws was messy, there wasn't a single bit of me that wasn't covered in blood. I retracted the claws and took a handful of my tattered shirt and ripped it off. I looked and saw a single man standing in front of a tent and staring at me. I stared back at him. The man had been standing there since I had started and hadn't moved. A second man clutching his stomach, which was bleeding through his bandages, wobbled out of the tent. He paused and looked at me. I looked at him and briefly contemplated killing them. Gentlemen, I hope we never cross paths again. But should we meet again, I hope it won't be under such similar circumstances. I figured I'd done enough killing today. I took a breath, activated my Byakugan, and shined back the way I came. I got within range just in time to see Minato dodge the future Raikage's punch. I raised an eyebrow and slowed my perception. Minato flashed behind A and aimed a kunai at his neck, but was interrupted by a huge tentacle. I shined into the clearing they were fighting in and took note of the lack of an army. I deactivated my Byakugan and eyed Killer B and Orochimaru with a raised eyebrow. My eyebrows climbed higher. Orochimaru seemed to be having a blast and was laughing evilly whilst he stabbed at Killer B with his sword. I turned my attention back to Minato, who had flashed onto a tree and was sending me some hand signs. Mission accomplished. Was he asking about things on my end? I blinked at him and gave him a thumbs up. Retreat. I gave him a second thumbs up. I was more than happy to stay uninvolved. Minato flashed behind A, who had been looking at me. I blinked at him. Nope. I shined away as fast as I could. It was a normal day. When I woke that morning, I couldn't have imagined what would happen. I licked my dry lips and did my best to ignore the Raikage, who was staring sharply at me. It started when the alarm was sounded. Your son and his partner left to take care of the threat. I took a shaky breath. I ignored the alarm and returned to the medical tent. A glass of water was placed in front of me. I held the glass with 2 hands and took a sip. I stared at the glass, feeling slightly better. Then the screaming started. I rushed out of the tent to see what was happening, and there it was, standing in the middle of what must have been 20 screaming men and women. I paused for a moment and took another sip of water. The monster spoke. Its voice was muffled, making what it said unclear from where I was standing. One thing was clear. I could tell from its tone. The monster was bored. We were nothing to it. I took a deep breath. It descended on our ninja with claws coated in lightning. It was like it was dancing through them. Every step or move it made, another body fell. I tried to swallow my spit, but I choked on the lump of my throat. Ninjutsu bounced off it, and Jinjutsu seemed to have no effect. It continued its slaughter undeterred by anything thrown at it. I nervously placed the water back on the table and continued. It didn't spare anyone. It tore through the camp and chased down those who tried to flee. I blinked rapidly, trying to stop myself from tearing up, the memory of it chasing after some fleeing Jin fresh in my mind. Eventually the monster stopped its massacre. It had run out of people to slaughter, and it stood in front of me. The thin layer of human skin it was wearing had fallen off, revealing its true form underneath. I wrung my hands together and tried to calm my breathing. Its mask melted, and I saw the smiling face of a boy. I looked up at the Raikage and saw he was watching me attentively. It gave me a bit of courage, so I continued. It stared at me and said, "Gentlemen, I hope we never cross paths again. But should we meet again, I hope it won't be under such similar circumstances." I did my best to copy the monster's bored drawl. It then disappeared into thin air, like it wasn't even there. I finished and slumped into the chair, exhausted. I took a moment to gather myself before looking at the Raikage. "Thank you, you may leave." I nodded gratefully and stood up. "Thank you, Raikage-sama." I bowed deeply and did my best to not look like I was running as I left the room. Chapter 45. I caught up with our useless army. I sped up to the front of the group and eyed the people who were leading the retreat. "So, why are we retreating?" I would have liked to have some support whilst I was rampaging through Kumo's camp. We probably could have killed off more of them. Minato-sama told us to sound the retreat when they encountered the Eight-Tails Jinchuriki. I hummed and didn't question it further, though I would have appreciated having some sort of backup. "Alright, speed up. Orochimaru and Minato are holding off the Eight-Tails Jinchuriki, so you useless fucks can escape." I slowed my speed and fell back so I could guard the rear. This whole ordeal was annoying. Minato and Orochimaru caught up to us when we were approaching the camp. Minato didn't have a hair out of place, but Orochimaru was missing a kimono sleeve. I raised an eyebrow. Orochimaru looked to be in a foul mood and Minato, in contrast, was smiling cheerfully. "Were you successful?" Orochimaru hissed at me. I nodded and Orochimaru seemed less angry at my nod. I looked at him for a moment longer, but when he didn't speak, I sighed and sped up. I wanted to sleep for a day or two. I also need to think about whether or not I even want to be here anymore. I've had about enough of the war. "Shiro! Look who I brought!" Minato dragged a struggling Obito into my lab, followed by a more sedate Rin and a bored-looking Kakashi. What happened to them being too green? I rolled my eyes and sent Kakashi a nod in acknowledgement and studied Rin for a moment. The markings on her cheeks were much bigger than I remembered them being. I turned my eyes away from her and looked at Obito. He looked as stupid as I remembered him looking. "Nice to meet you, I'm Shiro Hyuga." I watched a look of shock pass over Obito's face. Rin was studying me and Kakashi still looked bored. "Whoa! You're Shiro Hyuga." I eyed Obito, who was finally released and was now staring at me. "Yep," I replied and popped the pea. I turned my eyes to Kakashi. "Long time no see." Kakashi nodded. "Alrighty. Well, tell me about yourselves." Obito jumped up and down and started blabbering excitedly at me. I eyed Minato for a moment, hoping he would contribute. He just smiled. I gave him the stink eye. Fuck. I escorted Team Minato from my lab. I got them out the door and shut it behind them. I was finally free of them. I made a hand seal and a clone appeared. He went off to apply for a break. I was about done with Frost. I couldn't wait to have some time away from this garbage. I sighed. I needed to make a rough plan again. Now that I had achieved what I wanted to, I was having trouble finding the motivation to do anything. DNA manipulation seemed to be the way to go currently. But I wouldn't be able to add any bloodlines to myself. Even Orochimaru hadn't figured out how to do that yet. Awakening a dormant bloodline was easy peasy, but correctly integrating a foreign bloodline was not possible currently. Any bloodlines that could be integrated were weak and didn't operate as well as they did in the original holders. I let out another sigh. Or maybe I just needed to edit my DNA slightly and make my best traits more pronounced and awaken any useful dormant traits. I know Orochimaru did something similar to himself. He said something about awakening all his potential. I sighed and stared at the ceiling. I was feeling oddly lost. "So, you're heading to Konoha?" Orochimaru was applying a seal onto the back of a woman. "Indeed." I watched fascinated. Orochimaru was trying to make some sort of sage mode seal. "Bring your mother when you come back. She was one of the most competent scouts I've ever worked with." I hummed in affirmation. Having my mother around made me feel better as well. "I'll be leaving in a week." I gave Orochimaru a wave as I left the lab. "So, were you planning to become a Mednin?" Minato had somehow volunteered me for the job of teaching Rin. Minato had been talking, and when I had tuned him out and was nodding automatically, long story short, I accidentally agreed to teach her. "Yes." Rin spoke quietly. I hummed. Rin was surprisingly intelligent. Being able to use medical ninjutsu at such a young age was impressive. "All right." I was quiet as well, if only to match her tone. I eyed the Chunin. I asked Rin to heal. He was up and moving about and seemed to be in good health. I shooed him away and turned to stare at Rin. "I don't think there's much I can teach you about medical ninjutsu." Rin looked disappointed. "But..." I trailed off and smiled at Rin's hopeful look. "I do have something that you can learn." I had no interest in spending months teaching her. "Follow me." I turned and started making my way out of the medical tent. I made a hand sign as I was walking and a clone appeared behind me. He went off to heal some people and I continued on my way. I stared at a tree and thought. Rin was standing behind me, staring at me questioningly. I sighed. Alright, back up and watch. I turned my head and looked at her for a moment. I saw she backed up, so I proceeded to punch the ground. Boom asterisk. The earth cratered beneath me. My eyes widened. It seems this technique was a little more powerful than when I last used it. I stood in the center of the crater awkwardly and waited for the dust to clear. The dust cleared and Rin was standing at the edge of the crater and staring at me with bulging eyes. I smiled slightly at the sight. This is called chakra-enhanced strength. If you're interested, I'll teach you. I saw Rin nod mutely and my smile grew. Alright, let me put a gravity seal on you and then we'll start. I waved her over. I'll tell you about the technique while I apply the seal. I sat in the middle of the crater and patted the spot in front of me. Rin made her way over and sat rather elegantly in front of me. Alright, roll up your sleeve. I reached into my pouch and grabbed the scroll containing my supplies. Chakra-enhanced strength, or one for all as I've called it, requires a lot of concentration and chakra control. I put a drop of blood into a tiny jar of ink and started mixing it with my brush. It allows you to enhance your strength to monstrous levels. I ran the brush tip along the lip of the jar, getting rid of excess ink. This is done by storing chakra into one's hands or feet and releasing it onto the target with timing. I pressed my brush onto her skin and started on the seal. It sounds easy, and it is easy. Rin turned her head and stared at me with a questioning look. The most important requirement for the technique is high bodily strength. I brought the brush back down to the jar and dipped it in ink again. If you use the technique without the required bodily strength, you will break your bones and snap your muscles and tendons when throwing a punch. I brought the brush up and continued. So, you have to get your fitness up before you can learn the technique. Rin nodded. Is that why I'm getting a gravity seal? I nodded. Yep, if you're not training efficiently, you're not training right. I started adding the finishing touches to the seal. I'll train you enough that you'll be able to practice by yourself, but after that, it'll be up to you. I added the final character on the seal and started packing up my equipment. I eyed Rin, whose fist was covered in a barely visible light blue glow. Less chakra. She cut her output in half. That's about right. Now punch the tree and release the chakra the second you hit it. Rin jabbed the tree and it shook before leaning to one side. I saw her wince and hummed. Heal that and go again. You'll figure out the timing as well as your current limit with practice. After a few hand seals, Rin's left hand was covered in the green glow of the mystical palm jutsu. I watched as she touched her right hand and started healing it. Things were slow going. She was making progress, but it looked like my trip home would be delayed. I guess I'll make a scroll so I can leave it with her. Teaching Rin had delayed my trip home by a few weeks, but I'd finally called it quits and was ready to head home. Alright, it's been fun, but I'm heading home. Minato had a frown on his face, Kakashi looked bored, Rin sent me a smile, and Obito looked crestfallen. Alright, hopefully, we'll see each other soon. I nodded and started pulling a scroll from my kunai pouch. This is for you, Rin. It contains all I know about the strength enhancement as well as some future paths for you to take. I had written about the strength of 100 seal, body modification, and a few other things I learned. Hopefully, it would give her some direction. Well, CYA guys. I sent them a cheeky wave and shunshined away as fast as I could. I was done with Frost and I couldn't wait to get home. Konoha looked exactly the same as it had when I left. The atmosphere was different though. The last time I was here was several months ago. I was feeling odd, to say the least. It's the butcher. A certain whisper was carried better than the rest, and it reached my ear. I wandered Konoha, feeling weirded out by the whispers and looks I was receiving. I wandered around for a while longer before eventually making my way back home. It turned out that home was no longer my home. It was now occupied by a new family who directed to the house Mom bought. She had left a note though. After apologizing for breaking into their house and disturbing their dinner, I made my way to our new house. I stood in front of the new house, slightly regretting not sending a letter. I had wanted my trip home to be a surprise. I imagine Mom wanted the house to be a surprise as well. The house was less of a house and more of a mansion. I gave it a rough glance with my Byakugan and saw it was covered with fuinjutsu. The house was also protected from Byakugan snooping. I smiled slightly. I was afraid to try and enter the house now that I had seen how well protected it was. Shiro? I turned and saw Mom leaning out a window. Yo! I sent her a wave. She jumped from the window and made her way over to the gates. I didn't recognize your chakra. I smiled sheepishly but said nothing. My body and chakra were slowly changing, nothing major so far, just a slight affinity for yang release according to Orochimaru. I accidentally scared the family living in our old home. Topic change: no jutsu. After warning me not to use my chakra, Mom led me around the house and showed the place off while leading me somewhere. Its house was big enough for 10 people. It was odd, to say the least. Eventually, we ended up in the middle of what I call a storage room. So, why get a house so big? Mom hummed and took my hand before cutting the tip of my finger with her nail. I wanted you to have something to inherit when I pass. I watched a single drop of blood fall to the floor. The moment it hit the floor, a previously unseen jumble of fuinjutsu emerged and absorbed my blood before becoming invisible once again. So how much did that cost? Mom smiled. Kushina and Minato did it for us. I hummed. How nice of them. Mom grabbed me by the hand and started pulling me away from the room. She pulled me down a set of stairs and into a hallway where she proceeded to drag me down another set of stairs into the basement. Here's where you can build your lab. It was great and all, but I had one question. Where's emergency rations? Mom smiled nervously. He chewed a hole through the house and escaped. I eyed her for a moment. I wasn't sure I believed that. All right. I had been meaning to free him anyway. Which room is mine? I decided that emergency rations was probably living his best life and terrorizing the female rabbits wherever he was. I'll show you. Mom had a slightly silly smile on her face and proceeded to drag me out of the basement. I sat in my room staring at the ceiling. I wasn't sure what to do. With the Shikatsu Myaku, I didn't feel the need to practice any ninjutsu or jinjutsu, nor did I think I should bother with them. I needed to train with some weapons so I didn't injure myself if I tried to wield them. I also wanted to expand my reserves. It would fuck my control, but did I even need it right now? I didn't have any plans for more DNA manipulation. Control could be trained up again, though it would be annoying. Puberty was also starting, but so far it hadn't been a problem. Sigh. I rolled over and flipped my pillow to the cool side. I think I'll wait on the reserves. Even though it was tested and seemed alright, it was probably better to let my reserves expand naturally. Even if I felt that way, I wasn't patient enough to wait for it to happen. Whatever. I think about it tomorrow. Guy was out with his team, Dewey was training furiously in celebration for his promotion to Chunin, and Mom was visiting her cousin. So, I spent a good part of my day walking around Konoha under a hinge. Konoha seemed to be doing all right as far as I could tell. The atmosphere seemed gloomy, but the markets were well stocked and there weren't limbless war vets on every street corner. Konoha seemed to be in much better shape than I pictured it in my head. As far as I knew, grass was the only place where we were getting slaughtered. So maybe Konoha was doing extremely well? Whatcha got? I was slightly startled and bone spikes exploded from me. I turned my head and saw Kushina had narrowly dodged a bone spike to the gut. The bone started receding. Sorry. This was the downfall of having amazing reflexes. No worries. Kushina sent me a cheerful smile. I sighed and looked at my torn clothes. The Shikatsumiyaku was a clothes destroyer. I was looking at a scroll for Kenjutsu, though the scroll was now destroyed. I picked up pieces of the scroll with a weary smile. Want me to teach ya? I know a little Kenjutsu. Kushina grabbed me and shook me excitedly. I wouldn't want to take up your valuable time. Kushina squeezed me. That's okay. I'm not allowed out of the village right now anyways. I raised an eyebrow at that. All right? I wasn't sure there was a way out of this. There's nothing more I can teach you. After a few days, I had all the moves memorized and ingrained in my mind and body. You learn fast, Shiro. Maybe Kenjutsu is your calling. I just hummed. Kokoro no Kyoka for the win. Who else should I try to learn from? Kushina hummed. Mikoto is good with throwing weapons. I shook my head. I good enough with them. Kushina hummed and tapped her chin. I can't think of anyone else right now, but I'll let you know if I think of anyone. I sighed and nodded. All right. I waved my bone sword around. It didn't have a guard and was 6 feet long. I liked them tall and thin. A snigger burst from my lips. All right, I'm heading home. I gave Kushina a wave. All right, see you around. A bone came from my palm and connected to the sword, and the sword soon receded into my body. I sighed and stared at the sky. What do I do now? Interlude. Shiro Hyuga was a once-in-a-generation prodigy. He excelled in ninjutsu and taijutsu and was known for his strength and his distaste for social niceties. Shiro was an S-rank ninja, and when someone spoke about him it was with fear or respect. He was called Konoha's butcher. Which is why I wondered. Shiro-senpai? Senpai raised an eyebrow at me. Unlike what the rumors stated, Senpai was friendly and easy to talk to. Yes? I took a deep breath before asking. Why did you learn medical ninjutsu? Senpai hummed while picking at blades of grass. I knew it was something that would pay off later. I stared at him, silently asking him to continue. Sigh. I knew the time spent on medical ninjutsu would save me time elsewhere. I stared at him expectantly. I figured out I could use medical jutsu to forego exercise by strengthening my muscles artificially. Senpai ran a hand through his long white and gray hair before continuing. By tearing and healing your muscles near constantly, you can simulate exercise and forego it to some extent, thus saving time. I smiled at him. Wow, that's smart. Now you have more time to pursue other ninja arts. That was clever. I wouldn't have thought of such a thing. Yep. Senpai nodded, looking disinterested. Senpai was a hidden wellspring of knowledge. I would be a fool not to seize this opportunity. Do you have any tips for me, Senpai? Senpai shook his head, looking slightly exasperated. Yeah, don't ever become an official Mednin. The amount of disdain in his voice when he spoke was shocking. I stared at him disbelievingly. What did he have against medical ninja? If you become a medic, you get shafted in almost every way, mainly because of those rules. I knew what he was talking about and remembered the rules vividly. It was something near constantly mentioned in the medical books. 1. No medic ninja shall ever stop medical treatment until the lives of their party members have come to an end. 2. No medic ninja shall ever stand on the front lines. 3. No medic ninja shall ever die until they are the last of their platoon. 4. Only those medic ninja who have mastered the strength of 100 technique and the ninja art creation rebirth are permitted to discard the above-mentioned laws. It's especially annoying that you get punished if you don't follow those rules. They're not even official rules anyway. Senpai shook his head and stared at the sky. Whatever, let's get back to training. Senpai sprung up and made his way back to the crater-covered part of the field. I'll write down my method on exercise stimulation. Burn it when you are done with it. Senpai turned and looked at me. Well, I'll do it later, I suppose. I nodded happily. Thanks, Senpai. I was happy to learn new things, especially in such chaotic times. I'd try to get some tips from Senpai later. He seemed annoyed now. I decided it was best I didn't push my luck. But then again, perhaps it was worth the risk. Senpai, why do you push the chakra outwards around your fist when you use super strength? It was something that had been on my mind for a while. Why did you need to enhance your muscles and send out a blast of chakra? It's so you don't just pierce through whatever you're punching, it spreads the impact. Senpai's tone was bored. I made a sound of understanding. So, everything is affected by the force of the punch? Senpai just nodded and hummed. Yep. I stayed quiet and trailed behind Senpai as he made his way to a slightly less destroyed part of the clearing. I smiled. I couldn't wait for Senpai to teach me more. This was definitely an opportunity one couldn't miss. Senpai was one of the most skilled users of medical ninjutsu. It'd be a waste to not make the most of this. That's the end of the tale for now. Like the video if you enjoyed and subscribe to not miss the next installment, and until next time, peace.